Have you ever heard of someone named Benjamin Franklin? No? That might mean it's time for a refresher on American history. But this isn't the version you learned in school. In today's episode, we step outside the usual narrative and examine one of America's founding fathers from a completely different perspective. There are plenty of ways to describe Benjamin Franklin, but would you guess that, in his own time, words like perverse, tainted, rank, and even feral were used about him? As it turns out, Franklin had a reputation for scandalous behavior and an unapologetically indulgent personal life. From his early years to the end of his life, Franklin reportedly pursued his desires freely, visiting brothels and engaging with women both older and younger, sometimes at the same time. His first child wasn't even born within his marriage, yet his wife helped raise that child as her own. One thing is certain. After hearing this episode, you may never look at a $100 bill the same way again. Benjamin Franklin was one of the founding fathers of the United States. Most people remember him for his groundbreaking work with electricity, but he also invented a long list of practical things. Swimming fins, bifocal glasses, the lightning rod, a flexible catheter, and more. The man didn't just talk ideas, he built them. He was born in 1706 as the third child in a family that made soap and candles for a living. Translation: there wasn't money lying around. His parents could only afford to send him to school for 2 years. That's it. 2. By age 10, he was already working with his father. By 12, he was apprenticing in his brother James's printing shop. No fancy degrees, no elite education, and yet, he still became one of the most influential and well-known figures in American history. So the "I didn't go to a good school" excuse? He would not be impressed. During and after America's struggle for independence, Benjamin Franklin spent a significant portion of his time acting as a diplomat in Europe, and it's fortunate that he did. Author Walter Isaacson has argued that without Franklin's diplomatic efforts in France, the United States might not have won the war. However, Franklin's time abroad was not devoted solely to politics. At that time, Paris was considered one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the world. A surge of cultural enlightenment, combined with a thriving economy, gave the upper class both the atmosphere and the resources to indulge themselves and, well, behave a little wildly. But we'll come back to that shortly. Franklin appeared to fit comfortably into this setting. To understand just how bohemian his lifestyle was while overseas, it helps to look at an unusual morning routine he adopted during his years in France. In a letter to a friend, Franklin described what he referred to as air baths. He wrote, "I rise almost every morning and sit in my chamber without any clothes whatever, half an hour or an hour according to the season, either reading or writing. The practice is not in the least painful but, on the contrary, agreeable." Some might say that describing things in this manner can make them seem more suggestive than they really are. But in this case, there was nothing explicitly intimate about it. He was simply spending time in his home unclothed. As for what he did beyond that, well, that part is left to the imagination. Franklin's social life in Europe was packed with invitations to lavish, all-night parties where his reputation as an American statesman made him something of a celebrity. Reportedly, French women were especially captivated by him. One account even describes hundreds of women gathering around him, placing a decorative wreath on his head, and nearly forming a line to kiss him. His domestic life was said to be just as colorful. When the well-known painter Charles Willson Peale paid Franklin an unexpected visit one afternoon, he found the elderly diplomat seated with a young woman on his lap. A sketch attributed to Peale is believed to portray the scene, an unusual moment to capture in a drawing. Observers have noted that although the pose appeared intimate, both individuals were still largely clothed. Some historians interpret Franklin's habit of charming Europe's elite women as a calculated strategy, suggesting he hoped they would advocate for him and for American independence to their influential policymaking husbands. Others, however, contend that his behavior was less strategic and more reflective of his personality. Author Albert Henry Smith described Franklin by writing that his animal instincts and passions were strong and rank. Given Franklin's reputation for enjoying lively social scenes, it is not surprising that he moved in circles that included some of Europe's more infamous figures. Among them was Sir Francis Dashwood, whose path would eventually cross with Franklin's. Born in 1708, Dashwood was the sole heir to a wealthy merchant fortune. One writer memorably characterized him as an enormously rich man with a genius for obscenity. His interests seemed firmly established during his formative years, when he embarked on the traditional Grand Tour, a cultural journey across Europe undertaken by affluent young men. According to his tutor, Dashwood fornicated his way across Europe. In one particularly bold episode, he allegedly seduced the Empress of Russia while posing as Charles XII of Sweden, despite the fact that Charles XII was already deceased at the time. Dashwood's travels also fueled his fascination with ancient sacred rituals. Though he disapproved of the religious institutions of his own era, he was deeply intrigued by Europe's historical past. When he was not pursuing romantic escapades, he could be found wandering through dim catacombs lined with mummified remains or sitting among ancient Roman ruins, imagining the excesses of earlier times. It was this shared appreciation for indulgence and historical mystique that led to Dashwood's most notable creation, and ultimately to his friendship with Franklin, the Friars of St. Francis of Wickham, more popularly known as the Hellfire Club. Dashwood's Hellfire Club was intended to draw in the most morally unrestrained yet intellectually accomplished men of the era. Over time, its alleged membership came to include prominent figures such as the Prime Minister of England, the Lord Mayor of London, several of the nation's most celebrated artists and poets, the Prince of Wales, and, based on compelling evidence, possibly even Benjamin Franklin. Dashwood was publicly known to sympathize with the American Revolutionary cause and exchanged numerous letters with Franklin. In July 1772, Franklin visited Dashwood's estate at West Wickham for an extended stay. Records indicate that a club meeting occurred during that visit. Author Daniel Mannix observed, "There seems to be no reason why Franklin should have gone to Wickham at this special time unless he was a member. Only club members were allowed at Dashwood's estate during club meetings." With the likelihood of Franklin's involvement in mind, it is worth examining what he may have witnessed during gatherings of the Friars of St. Francis of Wickham. Members reportedly dressed in white monk's robes and were permitted to bring along a lady of a cheerful, lively disposition to improve the general hilarity. These women also adopted costumes, wearing nuns' habits and masks to avoid awkward encounters with husbands or acquaintances. One of the Hellfire Club's earliest meeting places was located along an island in the Thames River. Surrounded by a dense grove of elm trees, the secluded setting offered privacy from public scrutiny. The island was also home to the deteriorating remains of a medieval structure built in 1160, known as Medmenham Abbey. Dashwood undertook efforts to restore the site, though he deliberately preserved its eerie, ruinous appearance to suit his theatrical tastes. He also introduced several elaborate additions. Stained glass windows were installed, portraying club members in what were described as indecent poses. There was a striking fresco of a pornographic nature, which John Wilkes, himself no stranger to vulgarity, reportedly called unspeakable. The abbey further housed an extensive library containing classical works alongside what was reputed to be the finest collection of pornographic books in Great Britain. Under the cover of darkness, the robed members and their invited companions would travel to the island by way of a red gondola. Upon stepping ashore, they were met with the distant hum of the abbey's organ and the tolling of a haunting church bell. Outside stood an imposing statue of Harpocrates, the Egyptian god of silence, setting a secretive tone for the evening. Once inside Medmenham Abbey, Dashwood would serve a signature drink made of brandy mixed with brimstone. Glasses were raised in a toast to the powers of darkness. At the sound of a gong, the robed members would proceed deeper into the building, eventually gathering in the chapel. There, it is believed they staged a mock black mass in which a woman lay unclothed upon the altar, while the participants drank wine poured into her navel. Despite these elaborate rituals, it is generally thought that the members were not genuine Satanists. In fact, some reportedly found the theatrics tedious. John Wilkes, for example, once grew so bored that he orchestrated a prank. He dressed a baboon in a demon costume, locked it inside a trunk, and hid it within the abbey. When the group theatrically summoned Satan to appear, Wilkes secretly released the frightened animal. The members were stunned at first, then chaos erupted. The panicked baboon reportedly leapt onto John Montagu, 4th Earl of Sandwich, the man credited with popularizing the sandwich, prompting him to cry out in alarm. As the drinking continued, members and their guests would exchange risque stories or read aloud from popular erotic literature of the era. One such example came from a 1740 publication titled A Dialogue Between a Married Lady and a Maid, which included vivid anatomical descriptions presented in frank and explicit language. With plenty of alcohol consumed and provocative entertainment underway, attendees would gradually separate into pairs and withdraw to private chambers prepared in advance, reportedly equipped with what were described as the proper objects for lascivious activities. After years of operating in secrecy, accounts of the Hellfire Club's activities at Medmenham Abbey surfaced in a popular novel published in 1760. The story so fascinated the public that curious onlookers reportedly gathered along the riverbanks, hoping to catch a glimpse of the so-called monks arriving for their gatherings. Unwilling to abandon these private festivities, Sir Francis Dashwood responded by commissioning an elaborate network of caves on his own estate, located a few miles from the abbey. There, shielded from public scrutiny and accessible only to members, the Hellfire Club allegedly continued its exclusive celebrations. The secluded nature of this new venue, and its restriction to invited participants, adds weight to the theory that Benjamin Franklin may have been involved. In one of his letters, Franklin wrote, "The exquisite sense of classical design, charmingly reproduced at West Wickham, is as evident below the earth as above it." Author Daniel Mannix contends that Franklin's remark was likely referencing these very caves. Mannix further argues that Franklin would have been short-sighted if he hadn't joined the club. He was a diplomat trying to help his country, and the club gave him the entree to some of the most influential men in England. Because the membership lists of secret societies are notoriously difficult to verify, it remains uncertain whether Franklin personally attended any of these scandalous gatherings. Still, his documented friendship with Dashwood and his extended visits to the estate make the possibility difficult to dismiss. For those questioning whether such a club would align with Franklin's moral character, one might consider another revealing piece of writing attributed to him, a letter titled Advice to a Young Man on the Choice of a Mistress. Written in 1745 and preserved today in the Library of Congress, the letter offers Franklin's candid counsel to a friend, including his suggestion that older women make preferable companions, an example of the frank and provocative tone that complicates his public image. Now here's the part they definitely didn't highlight in your history class. Let's talk about Benjamin Franklin's weird behavior. In 1781, while serving as the United States ambassador to France, Franklin wrote an essay about farting. Yes, the essay was titled Fart Proudly, also known as A Letter to a Royal Academy About Farting. He wrote it while living overseas and sent it to his acquaintance Richard Price, a Welsh philosopher and Unitarian minister. In the essay, Franklin seriously, but also sarcastically, suggested that scientists should conduct formal research on flatulence and create medicine to make it less offensive. He argued that since digestion naturally produces large amounts of gas in the human bowels, and since releasing that gas often comes with a smell that offends everyone nearby, maybe, just maybe, science should solve that problem. He even wrote that it is universally known that during digestion, a great quantity of wind is created in the human body, and when released into the atmosphere, it tends to disturb the company because of the odor that accompanies it. Imagine being a respected ambassador and casually submitting a scientific proposal about improving farts. Iconic, slightly unhinged, brilliant. And if that wasn't bold enough, Franklin nearly killed himself trying to cook a turkey with electricity. In 1748, he wrote to his friend Peter Collinson in Philadelphia describing a picnic he planned along the banks of the Schuylkill River. The main dish? Turkey. The method? Kill it with an electrical shock and roast it using an electrical jack over a fire started by an electrified bottle, because apparently cooking the normal way was too boring. While preparing the turkey, Franklin accidentally shocked himself and was suddenly engulfed in a flash of light. He had electrocuted himself during his little science experiment. Later, he admitted in a letter to his brother that although he had shocked himself badly, the most significant injury he suffered was to his ego. Benjamin Franklin did not believe in being fragile. In fact, he believed in sitting completely naked in front of open windows. Yes, on purpose. Franklin was convinced that air baths, literally sitting unclothed in fresh air, were good for his health and helped prevent sickness. He regularly opened the windows of his home, sat there with no clothes on, and let the air circulate around him. He believed that fresh air improved overall health and that stale indoor environments were the real danger. At the time, many people thought cold weather caused the common cold. Franklin disagreed. He argued that people got sick in winter not because of the cold itself, but because they stayed crowded indoors, giving germs the perfect environment to grow and spread. So while everyone else was shutting windows tight, Franklin was airing himself out like laundry. Brutal confidence, zero shame, and then there's his love life. Franklin had an extremely active and complicated romantic history. He may have fathered as many as 15 children who were not legally his. While writing an essay titled Advice on the Choice of a Mistress, he boldly suggested that young men should consider older women as companions. His reasoning? He claimed older women would be more appreciative of attention and, as he bluntly noted, at night it was difficult to tell a woman's age anyway. Subtlety was not his strength. Despite being married for 38 years, Franklin had multiple mistresses. Some of his female acquaintances were simply friends, others were not. In his memoirs, he admitted that the hard-to-be-governed passion of his youth frequently led him into affairs with women he encountered along the way. And according to historical accounts, those urges didn't fade with age. From around 50 onward, he was often seen in the company of younger women. The man believed in self-improvement, but apparently not self-restraint. And just when you think it can't get darker, it does. Between 1757 and 1775, Franklin lived in a 4-story Georgian house at 36 Craven Street in London. In 1998, during renovations to turn the building into a museum, workers made a shocking discovery. A human thigh bone sticking out of the dirt basement floor. Police were called. A full excavation uncovered nearly 200 bone fragments belonging to 10 individuals, 6 of them children. Many of the bones had been sawed or drilled, and all dated back more than 200 years. Before you imagine a founding father running a secret horror chamber, relax. Franklin was not a serial killer. While living in London, he was friends with William Hewson, a former student of the anatomist William Hunter. Hewson conducted anatomical studies, which at the time often required cadavers for medical research. The bones were almost certainly connected to those scientific dissections, not some secret double life. Many scholars believe that William Hewson, the anatomist connected to those bones found at 36 Craven Street, likely used Franklin's basement as a private anatomy lab while Franklin was living in London. Whether Franklin knew the full extent of what was happening downstairs remains unclear. So either he was hosting underground dissections, or he genuinely didn't ask questions about what was going on beneath his feet. Both options are wild. Now here's something that sounds almost fake in today's world. Franklin never patented a single one of his inventions. Not the lightning rod, not the bifocals, not the flexible catheter. Nothing. He could have made a fortune. Instead, he deliberately chose not to patent his creations because he believed his ideas should be freely available to the public. In his autobiography, he wrote that since we benefit from the inventions of others, we should gladly serve others with our own inventions, freely and generously. Imagine inventing half the modern world and saying, "Nah, keep the money." Brutal selflessness. And then there's his weather obsession. In 1750, Franklin received reports about a waterspout in Italy that had come ashore and caused panic. At the time, many people believed waterspouts were columns filled with water. Franklin disagreed. After studying the phenomenon, he concluded they were actually rotating columns of air. He also identified similar land-based versions, which he called whirlwinds or land spouts. The word tornado would come later. In 1754, while visiting a friend in Maryland, he saw one in person. And instead of running away like a sensible human being, Franklin got on his horse and chased it into the woods. While everyone else fled, He followed the swirling column as it sucked up leaves, branches, and debris. Later, he described it by saying that while its forward movement wasn't too fast, a man on foot could keep up. Its circular motion was incredibly rapid. Yes, America's first unofficial storm chaser. Now let's talk about food. At 16, Franklin read The Way to Health, Wealth, and Happiness by Thomas Tryon. The book convinced him to adopt a vegetarian diet for part of his life. He decided to stop eating meat entirely. This caused friction in the household where he and his brother boarded, because cooking separately for one teenager refusing meat was inconvenient. He even admitted he was frequently criticized for his singularity. Still, he stuck to it partly because it allowed him to save money, sometimes skipping meals so he could buy more books instead. That's right, he would rather read than eat. And remember, this is the same man who only had about 2 years of formal schooling at Boston Latin School before leaving to help his family make soap and candles. At 12, he became an indentured apprentice in his brother James's printing shop. From there, he basically educated himself. He spent nearly all his modest earnings on books and built his knowledge from scratch. And it worked. Over time, he became known as a writer, printer, politician, postmaster, scientist, inventor, activist, statesman, and diplomat. Prestigious institutions such as Harvard University, Yale University, College of William and Mary, University of St. Andrews, and University of Oxford awarded him honorary degrees, despite him barely attending school in the first place. He also co-founded the University of Pennsylvania. From 2 years of formal education to honorary degrees from elite universities. That's self-made on a historical level. And finally, France. While serving as ambassador, Franklin became something of a fashion icon in French society. He leaned into his simple American image, often wearing a plain fur cap instead of powdered wigs. The French elite loved it. What looked modest and rustic back home became exotic and charming abroad. In 1776, at the age of 70, Benjamin Franklin arrived in France under instructions from the Continental Congress to secure military support for the American Revolution. He wasn't some unknown diplomat hoping to impress people. He was already internationally famous for his experiments with lightning and electricity. The French government supervised his stay, but Franklin didn't just make political waves, he shook up fashion. Instead of dressing like a polished European aristocrat, he leaned into the image of an American frontiersman. He wore simple clothing and fur caps. That rugged, unconventional look captivated the French elite. It was different. It was exotic. It was calculated. His style became so influential that the phrase coiffure à la Franklin was reportedly used to describe the enormous wigs French women began wearing. In 1778, he started wearing a white hat, and Parisian men soon adopted the trend. 70 years old, negotiating war alliances by day, accidentally launching fashion movements by night. Now rewind to when he was 16. His brother James had founded a weekly newspaper in the 1720s called the New England Courant. 16-year-old Benjamin desperately wanted to contribute, but his brother wouldn't let him. So what did he do? He invented a fictional widow named Silence Dogood. Franklin secretly submitted essays under her name. The pieces were written entirely from the perspective of this sharp, observant widow and covered topics like fashion, marriage, women's rights, religion, and social behavior. The column became wildly popular. As Mrs. Dogood, Franklin even attracted several eligible bachelors in Boston who wanted to marry the mysterious widow. That's how convincing and entertaining the writing was. After publishing 14 essays, Franklin finally confessed to his brother that he was Silence Dogood. James was not amused. By the following year, Franklin had grown tired of working under his brother and left for Philadelphia. Teenage rebel, secret identity, catfishing half of Boston intellectually. Now let's talk money and long-term strategy. When Franklin died in 1790, his will revealed something unusual. He left 2,000 pounds sterling each to the cities of Boston and Philadelphia, but with strict conditions. The money had to be placed in trust for 100 years. After that first century, it could only be used to provide loans to local artisans. A portion of the funds could be spent, but 50% had to remain invested for another 100 years. He basically set up a 200-year financial experiment. Over time, those funds grew substantially. Institutions such as the Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology in Boston and the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia benefited from this long-term planning. What began as £2,000 eventually became worth millions. The man thought in centuries, and as if inventing, writing, storm chasing, diplomacy, and long-term economic engineering weren't enough, he also established the first volunteer fire department in the United States. Let's summarize this properly. At 70, he became a diplomatic rock star in France and influenced fashion trends. At 16, he secretly wrote as a fictional widow and fooled an entire city. In death, he structured financial trusts that matured over 200 years. And in life, he helped create America's first volunteer fire department. Benjamin Franklin didn't just talk about helping society. He built systems that forced it to improve. For example, he believed fire protection in colonial cities was badly organized. Instead of just complaining, he wrote multiple articles in the Pennsylvania Gazette pushing for reform. As a direct result, in 1736, he helped establish the Union Fire Company, the first volunteer fire department in what would become the United States. People even jokingly called it Benjamin Franklin's Bucket Brigade. He saw a problem. He wrote about it. Then he built the solution. Now here's something most people don't expect. Franklin was inducted into the International Swimming Hall of Fame as an honorary member. As a boy growing up in Boston, he developed a deep love for swimming. One of his earliest inventions was a pair of hand paddles he used while swimming in the Charles River. He even experimented with using a kite to pull himself across the water. In the 1720s, a friend was so impressed by his skill that he suggested Franklin open a swimming school. He never did, but he strongly supported teaching young people basic swimming skills. Long after his death, the swimming world honored him for it. Yes, founding father, inventor, and competitive-level swimmer. By the mid-1700s, America was barely on the global map. But Franklin, he was already internationally famous. Through his scientific discoveries, his writing, and his diplomatic work, he became what many consider America's first true celebrity. At a time when most globally recognized artists, scientists, and musicians lived in Europe, Franklin built a name for himself across the Atlantic. The French, in particular, were fascinated by him. Portraits of the bespectacled, slightly heavy-set American were engraved and displayed in homes. His image appeared on snuff boxes and other products. When he died, the first edition of his autobiography was published in French. Before Hollywood, before pop stars, before influencers, there was Franklin. He also became the first Postmaster General of the United States. On July 26, 1775, the Second Continental Congress appointed him to the role. He oversaw post offices stretching from Massachusetts to Georgia and had the authority to appoint assistant postmasters. Previously, he had served as a colonial postmaster under British rule. His responsibilities were not small. He surveyed highways and post routes, created a clear accounting system for postmasters, and assigned riders to transport mail both day and night. In other words, he helped design the communication backbone of a new nation. And then there's chess. In 1999, Franklin was inducted into the U.S. Chess Hall of Fame. He had been playing since at least 1733. While serving as ambassador in Paris during the 1770s and 1780s, he constantly sought worthy opponents to sharpen his skills. In 1779, he wrote an essay titled The Morals of Chess, arguing that the game strengthened valuable mental qualities such as foresight, caution, and perseverance. Yes, he turned board games into philosophy. Now, for something even stranger, he invented a musical instrument. In 1761, after attending performances in Europe where musicians produced eerie tones by rubbing wet fingers around the rims of glass bowls, Franklin decided to improve the concept. He created the glass harmonica, an instrument made of spinning blown glass bowls mounted on a foot-powered rod. By touching the rotating bowls with wet fingers, players could produce a range of haunting tones. The instrument became wildly popular. Even Ludwig van Beethoven and Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart composed music for it. Although the glass harmonica eventually faded from popularity, Franklin considered it his most personally satisfying invention. Of all his creations, this strange spinning glass instrument brought him the greatest joy. And just when you think he had exhausted every category of human activity, he redesigned the alphabet. Between 1760 and 1770, Franklin created his own phonetic alphabet. He believed the existing English system was inefficient. He proposed removing what he saw as redundant letters, C, J, Q, W, X, and Y, and limiting each remaining letter to a single sound. He even wrote sample letters using his new system. It never gained widespread adoption, but the attempt alone says everything. If language wasn't efficient enough, he would reinvent that too. So let's stack this up properly. Founder of the first volunteer fire department. Honorary inductee into a swimming hall of fame. America's first international celebrity. First Postmaster General of the United States. Chess essayist and Hall of Fame inductee. Inventor of the glass harmonica, admired by Beethoven and Mozart. Designer of an entirely new alphabet. Franklin didn't just live one life. He lived about 15, aggressively, creatively, and without asking permission. History class really gave you the polite version.